Part of domestication of agriculture in Europe. And so we're talking about the band ceramic culture. Those are the first agricultural people in Central and Northern Europe. They're moving up the Danube River. This is what a typical band ceramic village would have looked like. Near them in the forest would have been hunters and gatherers. And so hunting, gathering, agriculture is coexisting side by side. These agriculturalists are building houses out of wood because this is a much different environment than the southeastern part of Europe, which is more Mediterranean. This is colder, this is weather, this is the environment that we're used to here in Michigan. The agricultural cycle is different. Again, called band ceramic because you can see they decorated their pottery with bands. This is a reconstruction of what one of these longhouses might have looked like, and this is pretty typical of the pottery that's found at these villages during this time. So again, the pottery and the architecture and the other things and the dating help us sort of talk about this group as kind of a cohesive agricultural culture, similar lifestyle, similar ceramics, similar architecture. So they would clear an area of forest, they would have their farms laid out, they would have pens for the cattle. As we talked about with lactose intolerance and lactose tolerance, cattle is much more important in the agriculture of Europe than it is in the Middle East. In the Middle East, sheep and goats are the most important animals. And in Europe, cattle were much more important than any other animal. So the agriculture in Europe is different than the agriculture in the Middle East. And you can see this is what archaeologists would find. These are the remains of the posts that would have supported the roof. So archaeologists don't actually find this material, but they do find the floor, and they find the remains of the supports that would have supported the roof. Right, so if you look at the Danube River, right, and it's going from southeastern Europe into central and northern Europe, and then you look at where these band ceramic agricultural village sites are found, not surprisingly, they're concentrated along the river early on. And then that slowly spreads from there into other parts. So they're really sticking to the river initially, clearing forest slowly, and then migrating their way northwards. Okay, in terms of genetics of the population, you guys read an article about human genetics. Right? It's a complicated story. Some people think that all modern European males have an ancestor from the Middle East and don't share a European ancestor, but they do. All Europeans have a female ancestor. They're descended from females of Europe ancestry, but there's a lot of debate about that. It looks like there were people who were migrating into Europe, right, from the Middle East, and that was in the southeastern part. But the further you get away from the southeastern section, the less of a genetic contribution you have in those populations. So it looks like agriculture migrated in, plants migrated in, and then the Europeans took this lifestyle, adapted it, invented or domesticated their own animals, such as the pigs, and then lived side by side with hunters and gatherers who slowly transitioned and slowly became agriculturalists themselves. But that was like a 1,000-year process. All right, so here's a trait. I think this is a specific genetic trait, and you can see that the way many of these genetic traits work in terms of their concentration in populations is it's sort of a clinal distribution, right? So it's not discrete presence or absence, but it's sort of like a gradation of the presence of a genetic trait, let's say from the Middle East. Okay, around 3500 BC, agriculture had already been in Central and Northern Europe for over 1,000 years. We start to see around agricultural villages are earthen walls appearing, right? And so a lot of archaeologists believe that what was the reason for these is defense, that warfare existed either between hunters and gatherers in these agricultural villages or between these agricultural villages themselves. And another important piece of evidence is evidence of a massacre that was found at one of these band ceramic villages in Germany. They found 18 adults, 16 children, the wounds on the skulls match up with the kinds of axes that were found in these Ban-Ceramic villages. So it's likely that another village attacked this village, maybe over fight over land or resources, or who knows exactly, and basically were there to annihilate the village. Again, one of these villages is about 40 to 60 people, so they were there to completely wipe out the village, and they basically just left the bodies there, and this is what archaeologists found. So it looks like there might be the beginnings of greater warfare at this time. And it might have something to do with agriculture, and it might have something to do with agriculturalists being territorial and sedentary and using the resources in their area and not being able to be mobile as much as hunters and gatherers. Okay, so another sort of interesting aspect of European agriculture that's tied also to this sense of territoriality are these large tombs, right? And you can see no aliens needed to build one of these tombs. These are tombs with they're called megalithic tombs, right? Large stone tombs. You can see these massive stones used to construct a tomb, and in the Ban-Ceramic phase, these had multiple burials. They buried someone in there, and you'll see that from the Stories in the Stone Age movie. They would bury someone in there, have a ceremony, close it up. If someone else from the community or the kin group died, they would open it back up and bury the next individual in there, have a ceremony, etc. But how did they get these massive stones in place? Again, no aliens needed. They were able just to coordinate. Right? Again, with any of these monumental constructions, this is something we're going to talk about in many, many classes in the future. The key ingredients to monumental constructions are labor and organization. Those are the two most important factors in the construction of these monuments. Right? So you can see simple technology was needed, nothing too advanced, but coordination of labor was the important part, and the motivation to get that labor mobilized. And so you can see them erecting that and then using a ramp to get that final capstone up there, and then they would remove that material. And a lot of these tombs are still visible on the landscape in Northern Europe, England, Denmark, Germany. You can still see a lot of these tombs, right? When you look at some of them in England, right? So here is Wessex, right down here. These are locations of megalithic tombs. When you zoom in, you can see that there's not just one area where these megalithic tombs exist. They're kind of distributed around the landscape, and so some people think that each village or each kin area had their own megalithic tomb. They also think that as you as an individual maybe were leaving your village and walking somewhere else, when you saw a megalithic tomb, you would know that you were now in someone else's territory. So it may have been a way of also marking territory, and shows the sense of agriculturalists having a high degree of territoriality, just like in Jericho, where ancestor worship was important and was connected to territoriality as well. Okay, and this is something that's seen in other communities and cultures as well. Okay, so some of these tombs become quite large later on, way after the Ban-Ceramic phase. They become, you can see, really large and focused on only maybe a few individuals or one individual. So they certainly change over time. But in the Ban-Ceramic phase, they're communal and they're used for the group. Right? And again, here's another type of that Ban-Ceramic tomb. So we'll review this on Monday, and this is where we're going to stop for the quiz. That will be this coming Friday. But on Monday, also, what I'd like to talk about as we get into agriculture and other areas is talking about the paleo diet, what it is, the pros, the cons, is it feasible, etc. That's something that we'll talk about on Monday. Right? So this is the second part of Friday's lecture, and please watch this before Monday, and then I'll see you guys on Monday. All right, thanks.